we're ready to start taking some wood off. And you can see that I've made all the lines. These are to assist me in my grinding, and it also helps me to make it symmetrical. Now, in order to use these lines, you always have to be looking at them. So you'll grind like this, and then like this for this two front, and then we'll stop and we'll talk a little bit more. So here we go. Okay, so we can see this angle cut here, and we're going to try and make the other side identical. But again, you have to watch it in order to use the line. Okay, so I'm not quite there yet on either one, but I'll get back there. But again, you can see this angle cut. It's going down and away, and we're going to start working on the tail next. And this is how I do the tail. So I tried to get the angle cut approximately the same, and that will start the progression of doing the cut down these long angles. So I'm going to stop the video there and go ahead with a bit more grinding. It's very difficult to film and do the grinding with one hand, and I'll be back. Okay. I did an angle sand along the edge, and I'm coming up to the line, not quite there yet. There's no hurry. Then I did the bottom here. Now these lines form an initial cut, and one of the ideas is to make sure that this lure is symmetric. So you can use these cuts to actually test symmetry, because if you look over here where the one cut comes down here and the other one comes down here, they actually are square and parallel. So that tells you that the cuts are very similar. One of the next things we'll be doing is this material here, in between the two lines, we're going to be rounding that over. But we won't do that just right away. I want to show you the other side here. You see the back of the lure, we have ground to these two sides as well. So I've taken off one side right to the line. You can see where the tip of my thumb is, and I left the other side on just as a comparison. So I've taken off a lot of material, and the way that you do that, because this is on a curve here, you use the rounded part of the tabletop belt sander where it goes around. that gives you a tool to do inside these curves here. So you see I've got those two sides here, round down. This is much thicker, and that's what these guidelines are for. They help you see what's thick and what's thin. And for the next part, I'm going to be tapering this tail down to the shoulder on both sides. And then I'm going to be bringing back this head. So I'll bring it back after I've done some grinding. It's very, very difficult to videotape this stuff, so I'm going to do the best I can by showing you intermediate steps. Alright, so I have been grinding from the tail down to the shoulder. So we know that this place, roughly right in here somewhere, is the thickest part. So what happens is, remember that angle cut we did on the tail? And we were left with something like this. And so I angled the sander to cut from this part here, which is the raised mark, down to the shoulder. So as I got there, you can see here there are some marks of the belt sander getting close to the shoulder. When this became flat, I knew I was pretty much done. Now I can bring this back a little bit by putting a little bit more angle on it. So here's the one that's not quite finished yet. You can see that this is got a bit of an angle there. So this edge right here is the final cut. That's where you want to be. And so you can see the angle here, and I've got some more material to take off. Now again, this is all meant to try and keep the lure symmetrical. I haven't started yet on the front of the lure, and all of this material right here will be taken down, and then we're going to start to round over. And this is our final point here. Now, we don't want a sharp razor edge there. We want a rather rounded edge. So as we round it, we'll get closer and closer, and then we'll stop and try and leave that line. So what happens is when we put this back together again, we'll take it apart, and then when we re-glue it again, there's always a little bit of glue on the top. So we're going to sand that off and get rid of this red line and make it all kind of flow together. Okay, so I'm going to do some more and I'll get back to you. Okay, so this line that you see now, this pink line, that's that middle one. And I'm not sure if you can see it by the light. I've come up very, very close to that middle one. So what I've got from the first cut, it's fairly flat, and then there's another angle cut that's fairly flat. Now look at what it is compared to the other side, which I haven't touched yet. Still lots of material there that's got to be taken off. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start working this back. The shape, the overall shape of the cross section of the body is kind of teardrops, so it'll be fat up here, narrowing down. So both sides have to come down the same. And by doing it using these lines, both sides come out very similar. And when it's time to get off of the belt sander, because the belt sander is used to remove a lot of material, you want to get it down to a point where you can hand sand it and take care of some minor imperfections and some maybe little bumps and lumps that are left in the original process. And it's a lot of work sanding, so you want to get as much as you can with the belt sander because it's designed to take off a lot of material. But don't go too far, because you can take material off, but you can't put it back on again. Small bumps you can fill, but you try not to make big gouges, because that will hurt. So the belt sander came with a 40 grit belt. I can't use that. It's just too fast. It's just too much. So I always use an 80 grit belt. Now, I've also worked on this side here, and you see a little tiny bit of a bevel. I'm not quite done. So there's still a fair bit of material to take off this. I'm going to do a bunch of sanding on this side to bring it back to where this is, and then I'm going to start to pull this back. So I'll come back after I've done a fair bit. Okay, so I've left this side the way it was with those nice sharp edges, those guides, and now I continue to round over all the way up the front of the lure. And you may be able to notice this is where the previous cut down the tail came out, and it's pretty much in the shoulder area. That's where you want to keep that. So the next phase of this, I'm going to take off one of these shoulders because this is flat. Not too much flat on a fish. Everything is a little bit rounded. So I'm going to show you how to take that down and round it out, round it out, round it out. Now the roundness is going to end somewhere in here because we want to maintain this flat spot as our diving plane. Okay, so here's what we had. We had this big flat back, sharp edge, and now what I've done is I've run the flat part of the belt sander up and down here and rounded it. It's not perfectly round, it never will be, because you've got kind of a round surface hitting a flat surface. So you round it as best you can. Alright, so we've done most of the sanding with the tabletop belt sander that we can. I've rounded these edges as best I can. The edges under here are really tough to do because you've got a curve happening and a round over happening, and you've really got to use the end of the belt sander and kind of get in there, and you can't make a great job, so you got to rely on your bit of sanding, hand sanding, to do this. But one thing I have done is when you check your lure, you put your two fingers, these two fingers, and you go from the back, from the front of the nose, and you start to go back, and you'd be surprised how quickly you can detect bumps and lumps, and makes an excellent way of checking out your rough sanding, because this really is still fairly rough sanding. This is done with 80 grit, but I still need to do more with 80 grit as well, and I will probably go up to 100, 120 grit before I split this apart. Alright, so I have completed the sanding with 120 grit paper. Starting to look very, very nice. Notice this flat part here. I'm going to leave that till after it's completely glued, the final gluing, and then I'll take that down, because there's always a little ridge line of glue that forms here, no matter how hard you try, and it's a real good time to round over this edge, and then you're done. So one thing about the eyes as well, remember the eye hole we put in earlier, you got to make sure that that eye is in a fairly flat, so if it's got very, very radical curves, you want to take that down, because the eye itself is flat on the back. So when you cut a hole, you would like two flat surfaces to join. Now how you're going to cut that thing, that socket, is with this Forstner bit. It cuts a very clean, very deep hole, but unfortunately, no matter how sharp, you can't seem to get these things in carbide. So no matter how sharp they are, if you were to drill that right now, you'd get some tearing around the edge. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to apply a little bit of crazy glue around the eye and then let it dry. And what that will do is after it's dried and you go to cut it, it kind of holds all the little pieces of wood together and it won't tear. So that's a hand process. And what you do is you set up the bit in a drill press. I don't imagine you could do it with a hand drill. And then you put it under by hand. Everything is not straight here, so you got to kind of do it by hand, and you do it real careful, and it's inherently not safe. So how to make it safer is you go slow and you wear a glove, at least a minimum glove on your left hand, because that's closest to the bit. I've never hurt myself. I hope I never do. But so you'll drill a little bit, look. If it's not quite perfect, you'll drill a bit more, slant it a little bit more. So if you've got a side that's thin, gets a little bit deeper, and then you'll try the eye. And what happens is, when you get this eye in, if you've done it right, it should actually bulge a little bit, because that's what fish have in nature. Now, sometimes the Forstner bit will grab and it will take out maybe more than you want. So a cute trick to fixing that is, when you go to glue in the eye, normally if the eye is perfect, I would use the same crazy glue. But if that eye is sunken in a little bit, I'll put some waterproof filler in the socket and then put the eye in it, and then I'll squish it a little bit with my finger, and then I can control the depth and I get a better finish. So I'm going to go off and do those sockets right now, and I'll be back. Okay, so I've drilled out the eye sockets with this Forstner bit. Now it just happens that I'm using a 15mm eye from a company called Living Eyes. They're very nice eyes. They have several different kinds. They have the white and dark, and this one happens to be yellow. It just happens that I keep one of every size in my garage, so when I'm fitting stuff. So I look around the edge here to make sure that I think it's deep enough, and then I try the eye in it. Now, in a real life fish, the eye bulges a little bit, so when you pop it in there, if you look at it from the side, I think you can see that it is bulging a little bit, which is not bad. Getting the eyes right is always a lot of work, and you got to be fussy, otherwise it doesn't look right. So this eye bulges a little bit as well. So this is in good shape now, and the next step is I'm going to put a pair of needle nose pliers in this hole and in this hole, which is going to pry out. Remember, there's glue here and there's glue here. So as I put in pressure in here with the needle nose pliers, because they're kind of wedge shaped, it's going to expand that. And then I'm going to take a razor knife with a long razor and stick it through there and work it all the way down to split this guy. So I'll be back in just a few.